Hi everyone and welcome back. So we are going to start off with chapter 4 of the fundamentals of human neuropsychology. So in chapter 3 we covered a lot, and I know I bombarded you guys with a lot of anatomical terms, but it is important that you know basic brain anatomy before we go further and talk about different functions and different diseases, etc. So, if you have not watched the previous videos, please go back and watch those. I go over a lot of terms that I keep using in future videos, so please watch those. Okay, so in the next couple of videos, we will cover chapter 4 of the fundamentals of human neuropsychology, and we are going to talk about the neuronal structure and neuronal communication. So structure and the electrical activity of neurons. So we're gonna cover all the different parts of neurons, cell body, the axon hillock, etc. We're gonna talk about how they talk to one another and how they create that electrical activity. And then lastly, in one of the last videos, we'll talk about how they integrate information together. Okay, so in this lecture, we will go over the anatomy of a neuron. And this is a very schematic and kind of like a famous view of what a neuron looks like. So you have your cell body, your soma. Soma and cell body are the same thing, just different names. And then you have the dendrites right here. They branch out. Sometimes they have a couple, but sometimes they have many dendrites. So, and then attached to the soma is the axon. So the axon is really important for the information processing. At the end of the axon, you have the axon terminals. So these attach, or they come really close to dendrites of other cells. So if this cell connects to another cell right here, we call this cell the presynaptic cell and this cell the postsynaptic cell. So another thing to point out is right here is often where this is where the action potential starts. And this is where what we call the axon hillock. And then right here you see the myelin sheets very schematically. And myelin is a really fatty substance that covers the axon, and it will speed up the information processing throughout the axon. So without the myelin, the information will go really slow, but with the myelin, information will kind of jump over the myelin and go really fast to the end of the axon. Okay, so we already talked about a couple of these, but what is a neuron? So you have to remember what a neuron is. A neuron is an information conducting unit of the nervous system. So it's an information processing cell. It has information and it gives information to other neurons, so to other information processing cells. So whenever the information comes into a cell, it starts off by coming into the dendrites. So the dendrites are attached to the soma. They often branch out. And the dendrites collect information from other cells. The dendrites also increase the cell surface area. That's why they're also branched out. So on these dendrites, there are these tiny little protrusions, and those are called dendritic spines. So again, they increase the cell surface area even more. So next up we have the axon. The axon is what is, so you have the dendrites, soma, here's the nucleus in the soma, and then here's where the axon starts. So the area where the axon starts is the axon hillock, and the axon extends out from the cell body. So towards the end, you have smaller branches out of axon collaterals, and these are called teleodendria. Okay, and all the way towards the end, for example, all the way at this little point, this could be a terminal button. A terminal button is a part at the end of the teleodendrion. So it sits often really close to a dendritic spine of another neuron, of what we just said, a postsynaptic neuron. And if you zoom in really, like a lot, this is what you will see. So here you have the presynaptic neuron. Here you have the postsynaptic neuron. Here's the axon. Here you have the teleodendria. And here, where the teleodendria is really nearby the dendrite of the next cell, this is what this looks like. So this is what this is the terminal button, and together this is what is called a synapse. So a synapse is, they don't really attach, but they sit really close together. So as you can see, I'll go over this image a tiny bit more. I think in the next slide we'll go over it in more detail. But information goes out here through these tiny little chemicals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters will then be sent to the dendrite of the postsynaptic cell, and then that will convey a message to that cell. So information comes from the axon hillock, goes through the axon, and then at the end, through neurotransmitters, the information will go to the next cell. So this is the presynaptic cell, this is the postsynaptic cell. Together, this is the synapse, and the little area between the two cells is called the synaptic cleft. Okay, so synapse, we already talked about that, is the space between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron. So synapses can either be excitatory, so they will make it more likely for the next cell to fire an action potential, or they will be inhibitory. They will tell the next cell to not send out another message. So information, the messages of information that go from one cell to another cell go through neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemicals that are released from the terminal buttons of the presynaptic cell and that carry the message across the synapse. So we'll go over that in more detail later on, but again, here you see the presynaptic cell. Here you see these little vesicles that contain neurotransmitters. These vesicles will go downwards. They will fuse with the membrane of the end of the presynaptic teleodendrite, and they will let all the neurotransmitters go out. Then on the other side, the postsynaptic cell, so this is a synapse, presynaptic, postsynaptic. On the postsynaptic cell, in these membranes are little channels, and they will either, they're very specific, and they're specific to these types of neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters can attach to them, and then either this cell will be excited or will be inhibited. Okay, so here's another example of a neuron. So here you see all the dendrites. These look very different than from the previous picture. Here you have the cell body. Here you have the axon hillock, the axon, and then sometimes the axon has collaterals. At the end of the axon, you have the teleodendria with the terminal button or the end foot, and those can connect to dendrites from neighboring neurons. Okay, so here you have an axon coming in, here you have the dendrite of this neuron. If you zoom in, this is what you will see. So on the top right, you see an electron micrograph with a synapse. So the axon here meets the dendrite. And down here in the blue and red image, you see a high power light microscopic view inside of the cell body. So here's dendrite, Here you have the cell body, axon hillock, axon, and then here you see the nucleus. Okay, so in case you didn't get that from the previous slides, the information goes in from the dendrites, which collect electrical signals. The cell body will integrate incoming signals and it will generate an outgoing signal to the axon. And then in the axon, this signal will be passed on to dendrites of other cells. Okay, and that was the end of this video. So in the next video, we'll talk in more detail about the different parts of a cell.